HanselMinutes.com. It's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 197, recorded live Wednesday, January 27th, 2010. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this episode, Scott talks about the DLR with IronRuby Program Manager Jimmy Schementi.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. And this week, I'm up on campus at Microsoft, and I'm sitting here in Building 41 with the one and only Jimmy Schementi. How are you, sir?
Pretty good, Scott. How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
You, sir, are the PM, Program Manager for IronRuby, and also IronPython right now.
That's me.
So I am here in your office, a lovely office you have here, a small windowless office in the middle of the bowels of the beast.
My cave.
That is Building 41. And I want to know what's the status of the DLR, the Dynamic Language Runtime? What's up?
So, the Dynamic Language Runtime was announced 3 years ago or whatnot.
Sounds about right.
As a runtime for dynamic languages on the CLR. Mm-hmm. What it's turned into is a platform that actually C# and VB have built upon. So to either remind or cue in listeners, the Dynamic Language Runtime language-specific pieces have shipped in or shipping in Visual Studio 2010 .NET 4.0. So
okay, so you're saying that .NET 4.0 is DLR, the DLR1 shipped in that, or I guess DLR4 we would call it. What do you guys call? What do you call it?
Well, it's System Core, really.
Okay, so System.core, it's inside there.
Yeah, so System Core has been updated with all the dynamic language runtime expression trees and all the things that dynamic language implementers would need to depend on when making their language.
Okay.
There's another set of APIs, the hosting APIs, which users would consume. So if you want to host one of these languages, those are not in the framework. So that's the piece of the DLR we left outside because we weren't done with them.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this then. So I want to make Scott.NET. I can do that on .NET 4 without adding any references to any strange DLLs. Once I've got System and System.core, I'm doing my thing.
Yep.
Then Jimmy wants to write an application that happens to host the Scott.NET scripting language. You then bring in System.what?
You bring in Microsoft.scripting.
Microsoft.scripting. Okay,
yep.
So Microsoft.scripting is the out-of-band hosting stuff.
And we've actually frozen that API. So we've done all the due diligence to ship it in the framework. We just weren't satisfied with the quality at the time, but now we are.
Okay. So where do I get that?
So that's available both. So main place is dlr.codeplex.com.
Okay.
It is also part of Ruby and Python's, IronRuby and IronPython's distributions, but the latest one's on dlr.codeplex.
Okay. Now, if I'm using .NET 3.5, what are my DLR options?
There's also a build for 3.5 on dlr.codeplex.com, which gives you Microsoft Scripting.dll as well as Microsoft Scripting.core.
Okay.
.dll, which is exactly the same source code that we moved into System Core. In fact, it's System Core.
Just renamed.
Basically, everything that is in System Core is now in that assembly.
Okay. So I can understand that System Core is supported because it's going to ship with 4.0. So that means that if I'm a company that wants to use dynamic languages, it's totally a supported thing.
You've got your 10-year support contract, right? Support. It's in the framework.
Now, but if I want to use it on 3.5, I'm going to go to Codeplex and get this. Yep. What's the relationship there?
That's just an open source project and MSPL licensed, but
so even though it's identical, when I'm running under 3.5, it's effectively yet another open source library that I would use, and I have all the guarantees that open source provides.
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Which is exactly
you have all the benefits that open source provides, right?
Are you going to keep those in sync, or is that the end of that?
Yeah, so those are going to be in sync. Now, I don't foresee a lot of changes to the core soon. I think we're going to be doing more innovation in the hosting APIs. Now that while the hosting APIs that a user consumes are hardened, I said we did the due diligence to get those in the framework.
Okay.
What we didn't do is the due diligence on what a language implementer would have to do to interface with the hosting API. So we're still working out those kinks. And that's the main reason why we didn't put it in the framework, but that's where most of the work will be done in the future. But any changes that'll happen on the Codeplex side will be moved in the framework. What's in the framework is moved in the Codeplex, vice versa.
So how does that affect the development of Scott.NET? As a language developer, if I go and invent this new language, the fact that some of the things aren't baked on the hosting side, does that change my life at all?
It shouldn't. So very rarely, do we actually make breaking changes. It's just more about, making it easier, right? So, if you want to take, new dependencies on whatever the new things we'll be doing, that's great. But as far as, breaking changes, we try not to make those a lot. But in the hosting API, as far as what your users would consume, that won't break. So you can at least, if you as a language implementer have to take some pain, your users won't have to even rebuild. So.
What are some languages that are dynamic languages? There's Ruby and Python, but what other ones are people really actively working on?
So PHP is considered a dynamic language also.
But like .NET implementations.
.NET implementations.
Like, I want to understand what's sitting on the DLR.
Oh, sure. So there's a bunch of random things. There's a scheme implementation. Iron Scheme. I don't really know how well of a scheme implementation it is. It's almost a 1.0 release, but I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Lisp or scheme person. I'd have to ask Bill Childs about that. Speaking of which, Bill actually wrote a sample language for the DLR called Simple, which is like a weird scheme Python mixture. I should say
Lisp. So a complete sample that shows how to make a simple
so a complete
language.
sample of how to make a language called Simple. It's like I said, it's a Lisp and Python mashup basically of a language. So it's a that's
cool.
There's also just recently at least announced was IronJS. So
IronJS.
So an Iron JavaScript.
Wasn't there a JavaScript implementation of DLR?
Yeah, there was
many years ago.
Yeah. So when DLR was announced, this was like Mix 06, or something like that.
Something like that. Mix 06.
Yeah, 06 or 07. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, it was Mix 06.
Okay. So, when that was announced, there were 4 languages that were said that we were working on.
Right.
One was Ruby, one was Python. Ruby was the new one. And then we also said there would be JavaScript and there would be VB. JavaScript and VB turned out to be languages that we were just using as vetting of the design.
I see.
And what ended up happening was they were different teams that were maintaining them. So the VB team had a couple people who were working with us, and the JavaScript team at Microsoft had a couple people who were working with us. And we vetted the design with them. It was great. And, JavaScript had other priorities like, with IE and VB with, Dev 10. So our schedules didn't align.
Okay.
So we use those languages as tests basically to verify that the DLR was a good framework to build upon. So the code, in our internal repository is gone, as in broken beyond repair, right?
It's atrophied.
For the past 4 years, we tried to keep them working, but I think last year we decided to pull the plug on JS, and VB we pulled the plug long before, just because it was too much for us.
And just to make sure that folks that are listening understand, this was a sample implementation of VB, VB script, probably?
It was called VB script.
Right.
Yes.
And this has nothing to do and no relationship at all with Visual Basic and Visual Basic 10 that ships in .NET 4.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to make sure that folks
no relation.
Okay, so then those are dead, but those are kind of off, vestigial.
Yep.
Talk to me about IronRuby and IronPython. Where's their status? I mean, are they still toys, or is it time to start doing some work?
So IronPython hasn't been a toy for a very long time, and IronRuby is definitely graduating out of toy phase.
Okay.
Even for months it's not been a toy, I would say.
Really? Wow. Cool.
So IronPython's current release is 2.6.
Okay.
2.6 was released at the end of December, and basically it's compatible with Python 2.6. So the current version of Python and IronPython are fully
Really? So it's a real thing. I mean, it's a complete Python distro.
Now the places where it's not compatible are where third-party extensions to Python have been built that are written in C. Those like NumPy, for instance, that doesn't run directly on IronPython. Though there's
what is this NumPy?
So NumPy is a numerical computing library.
And this is a library that's just Windows specific or IronPython specific?
No, it's Python specific. It's written in C. It does work on Windows. It does work on Unix, but we don't support the C API that Python exposes.
Okay,
right?
so if I understand, because IronPython sits in the DLR, which sits in the CLR, that means that IronPython is completely managed.
Yep.
This is the kind of the p-invoke equivalent.
Yeah,
You've got a totally native library.
Yes, exactly. And while, we don't even suggest bridging that gap because the p-invoke boundary would be very costly. So what we suggest for people writing IronPython extensions, you just write them in C# and we can consume them. But there is a project called Ironclad, which is an implementation of the Python C API on the CLR. So you can use this library to bridge the gap, but we don't support that. But that's the only place where IronPython falls over today.
Okay.
Everywhere else, as far as the compatibility in the language, and then integration with the .NET framework is there. On IronRuby side, IronRuby's approaching a 1.0 release. We've been saying this for a while, but this time I actually mean it.
I'm going to say, you have been saying this for a while.
So we released 1.0 RC.
So you really are close.
At RubyConf, which was in the middle of November.
Oh,
So we released the first release candidate. We're planning another one.
Okay.
In the beginning of next month.
That'll be February 2010 for those of us who may be time travelers or listening to this in the future.
Yes, exactly. So, and then we're going to, that'll hopefully not have another RC after that, depending on.
So what's the feedback?
Things.
What's the vibe?
So it's a lot faster than it used to be, like a lot faster. And we're still doing performance improvements. So the nice thing about an open source project and something where we can kind of run our test suite within the course of a couple days to see if we broke anything, is we can make pretty significant changes even this late in the game. So though it's an RC, we've heard, from the 0.9 releases when we were coming up to the 1.0 RC that, performance needs to be better, especially startup. So we've been working on startup, decrease startup time by half in the last release.
So I could read the code, but seriously for a second, let's pause, geek out for a second.
Sure.
How did you decrease the startup time? Why was it slow, and how did you decrease it by half?
So do this little trick, both in Ruby and in Python.
First tell me why it was slow.
So it was slow because we were JITting call sites, which in the DLR is basically a signature of a method, right? But we were JITting those for every generic type that we used when starting up, and that turns out to be really, really, really slow. So we just delayed that JIT compiling until you're actually running the code rather than doing it at startup. So we would pre-compile these things thinking we were smart and we weren't. And it just shows how hard language implementations are.
Hey everybody, this is Scott coming at you from another place and time. No doubt you probably bump into testing tasks now and then in your work. And writing functional tests is probably not your favorite thing. It's kind of difficult, takes time, and the results can be dubious. Well, get ready to start liking tests thanks to Telerik with the new WebI testing framework. Building web automation tests is a breeze. You've got code automation with advanced ASP.NET Ajax and serverless applications. You can write a single test, have it executed against multiple browsers at once. You benefit from a rich API. There's link support, integration with Visual Studio unit testing, also NUnit, XUnit, and MBUnit. Not to mention the free wrappers for Telerik RAD controls for ASP.NET Ajax and Silverlight, all shipping with Telerik's new testing tool. One of the best features, the WebI testing framework, which is developed by Art of Test, is it's absolutely free. If you've already got hooked on WebI testing framework, start using it right away. Go to Telerik.com for more info. Thanks a lot. Would you say that you did a micro optimization, or you just took a bet that you were doing something to be faster and you just bet wrong?
So we knew. Well, I don't know because I didn't write that initial code. I'm not sure why it was like that, but how we found it was just from running Ruby applications and looking at their startup, and then running the CLR profiler on our code and seeing where we were sitting, and we just doing this unnecessary work in the JIT for a very long time. So just a matter of kind of looking at it and saying, oh yeah, we can remove this. So
what kind of Ruby apps are you running?
so that Ruby app was interactive Ruby. It's the Ruby command line
the IRB.
program, IRB.
Uh-huh.
But we also do startup and throughput perf analysis on Rails, on other web frameworks like Sinatra.
So what do you think? So Rails runs fine on IronRuby?
Yeah, so Rails runs fine. We actually have done a lot of work. We did a lot of work about 6 months ago for RailsConf to show real apps running on IronRuby. So the year before that, we showed the simplest hello world thing working, which was like, oh my God, I don't believe we actually got this working, because it wasn't stable, but we showed it and it was great. Mm-hmm. And a year later, we're running real apps in kind of, almost.
But do they have to be changed to add in some Microsoft-y thing?
No. So the interesting thing is they ran unchanged, because Rails is database. So I should pop up for a second. We did have to, not add things to Rails, but add certain support, to things like the database adapters in Rails. For instance, Rails, has a SQL Server adapter that talks through ODBC.
Oh,
and we wanted to talk to ADO.NET.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't want to talk
so we had to build a, it's actually, Ruby has a DBI, a database interface, API, which we then added a ADO.NET, implementation to. And then the SQL Server adapter for Active Record, which is part of Rails, that talks to SQL Server, now just supports, if it uses that version of DBI, it just worked. So we had to do those type of changes. But the apps don't have to change, because Rails itself is database agnostic, where you want to build the database, it just, you use Ruby code to do it. And same thing with the web servers.
So help me out. What does this look like? Because I think a lot of the people who are listening have heard about IronRuby. They've read the blogs, but I doubt that the majority of people have downloaded this and set this up. So on Windows, I go get IronRuby from the DLR site at Codeplex, and then what happens?
So we have our own Codeplex site for ironruby.codeplex.com. You just click the download button. The default downloads a zip file.
Okay.
And basically you just
not an MSI.
So there is an MSI in there too, but the default's a zip.
Okay.
And you just unzip it to your C drive, and IronRuby's sitting in there. The bin directory has all the IronRuby binaries, and if you just double clicked ir.exe, it would give you a command prompt.
Okay. Which is the same as IRB?
Which is exactly the same as IRB.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I can do interactive Ruby, I can teach my kid Ruby, I can do all that kind of try Ruby stuff. Okay, so now I want to make a Hello World Rails application. Then what do I do?
So then because IronRuby is a Ruby implementation, so we ship with all the things that Ruby would usually ship with, and one of them is a package management program called Gems.
Wow.
And so because you have the Ruby install there, you do gem install Rails. And IronRuby would then go to the Ruby Gems repository on the internet, download Rails, install the necessary programs for you.
Okay, so just want to make sure I understand. So gem.exe that you ship is a .NET application?
No. It's a Ruby app.
What is it?
It's a Ruby application.
It's gem.rb?
There's gem.bat and then gem, just gem, but it's a Ruby program.
Okay, so gem.bat calls...
It calls ir.exe with the program gem and sends the arguments along.
Good.
Yeah. So
maybe obvious to you, but not necessarily.
Sure.
So then when you start bringing down Rails, then you're bringing down Ruby code, straight Ruby code.
Yep. And you're running Ruby code at that time.
And then what's the name of the web server that Ruby uses? It's been a while for me. Rails rather. It's been a long time.
WebRick is the default web server. There's a bunch of other web servers like Mongrel and Thin, etc. You can actually use Cassini though on Windows.
Cassini is the code name internally at Microsoft, or the old name for the Visual Studio web server.
You can still find the Cassini sample.
That is true.
Right?
That is true. Cassini is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
But let's say that I wanted to run this on IIS 7.
Yes.
Then what do I do?
So there's another binary you download. We should package it up as a gem one of these days, but it's something called ironruby.rack. And rack is a Ruby framework for abstracting away the web server from the web framework. So Rails, Sinatra, camping, You name it,
They have
whatever.
such fun names.
Yeah, I know.
You're just like,
I love
as far
it.
as I'm concerned, you're just like
I'm
making
just making
random names.
making stuff
They've got
up.
like Chandler Bing and Serpico and you're just making names up. As far I have no idea if these are real things. Afterwards, I'm going to go and Bing for it.
Oh, fact check me. So the random web frameworks that Ruby supports all support this shared rack framework, which is basically abstracting the request and response
Right.
away. So we have a version of that for IIS, and that's how you deploy any Ruby rack-based web application on IIS.
So we had to make a better SQL Server driver that goes to ADO rather than ODBC.
Yep.
And an interface to talk to IIS7.
Yes.
And it was that interface, is that using like ISAPI or is it using like FastCGI? Or
It's actually an ASP.NET handler.
Rock on.
Yeah. So
Why is it not FastCGI?
So because I didn't want it to be.
Good for you.
So FastCGI is great when you have two completely disconnected processes, right? So you have your web server and you have your application server, and you need to bind them together.
Right. This is what we use for PHP.
Exactly. So FastCGI talks across the process,
Right.
To communicate between the web server and it. Well, we have IronRuby. It's .NET, and IIS has the
So why?
ASP.NET pipeline built right in. So we plug directly into that.
Oh, and you're in proc.
Yes. So your Ruby code is actually running in the same process that is running the ASP.NET app.
That's cool. Does that make things faster?
It does, because we can utilize all of the optimizations that have been done for ASP.NET, at least for the request processing.
Right.
We haven't done anything crazy like rewrite Rails' routing to use ASP.NET routing or anything crazy like that.
I suppose you could though.
You could if you wanted, sure.
Yeah.
But so that was just the kind of design decisions as far as doing that. So the nice thing about deploying then is it's nothing different. It's no different than an ASP.NET app, right? Your Rails app has a web config in it.
Yeah.
Right. Which
copy it over, make an application pool and a vector.
Exactly.
And boom.
Exactly. So that's all you have to do to deploy it.
Wow. So do you know of any live applications that are running IronRuby on Rails that are out there we can visit?
So this. No, because...
Well, maybe they're not telling you.
Yeah, well, so people are trying. Let's put it that way. So this Rails support that's really good with this new adapter and running on IIS is only been stable for the past couple months. So now people are starting to use it and starting to try to run their apps on it and reporting bugs. But we've had a lot of chatter on the mailing list about people trying and asking questions and whatnot. So, hopefully there'll be deployments in the near future.
What's the speed like? Like, I'm just imagining, let's say that you've got a .NET shop that's got IIS7, but they've got one Ruby app that they need to run. Why would they want to bring it over into IIS and IronRuby? I guess probably because they have .NET expertise in that space.
So definitely .NET expertise, teaching, not having to relearn how to deploy an app is crucial.
Right, and sure, maintaining it, managing it, and debugging it, and all that stuff is...
Yeah, it's all the same. The deploying a Ruby app on Windows is very painful today using standard Ruby. You have to depend on FastCGI, which, is okay, but it's not as easy as doing it on Linux. Mm-hmm. So for instance, Apache has something called mod Rails, which is essentially a native hook into Ruby to run Ruby inside of Apache.
Oh, so it's the equivalent of your handler.
It's the equivalent. And what's nice is, this doesn't exist for Windows. This Apache handler actually isn't supported on Windows at all. So we have an interesting opportunity to say, if you really want to run Ruby on Rails applications well on Windows, IronRuby is the way to do it. So that would be why why someone would want to do it.
Do you think it's a really active community? Because I think that for the average VB and C# developer, we know that the IronRuby and IronPython are out there. We know IronPython's more mature. Is there? I mean, it's not like you hear this promoted a lot. I mean, I think it's a pretty neat thing. I mean, that people should know about. But are you guys under the radar? Is there just like 4 or 5 of you guys, and you're just like panning this out and hoping no one notices that you're here?
Some days I feel like that, but
I mean, I think you know where I'm going with this.
I do.
You know what
So
I mean, I know you're not like a VP that can talk about strategy of whatever.
Definitely.
But you know what I'm trying to say.
So dynamic languages are actually pretty important to the team that is also the C# and VB team.
Okay.
So C#, VB, IronRuby, IronPython, F# are all part of the same team. We're under the same management. And because of IronPython's, kind of, been here first status, right?
Yeah.
We're definitely focusing on making IronPython, a first class language on .NET, as far as first class dynamic language on
So
.NET.
it's extremely mature is what you're saying.
Yes. And really the only thing lacking right now with IronPython is tooling. There's no Visual Studio integration, and that, as much as it pains my heart, most .NET developers won't even look at it if they can't do file new project.
Well, and the thing,
right?
I think that speaking as, putting myself in the role of the public, from the point of view of the public, F# came out of nowhere and jumped in to the new project dialogue. Yep. And, IronPython is kind of like Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters, where it's like, hey, how's it going? Hey, remember me? What happened? Why are we Rick Moranis in Ghostbusters?
I don't know. I would say first off that F# has a specific customer,
scientists
who are going to pay money
with
right?
coats.
Yes,
they have really nice white coats, and they have money.
And money is important. Not to say we couldn't sell,
your point is taken.
Python or Ruby,
F#
right?
is a science and math language, definitely.
Yes. Now Python is too, which is interesting.
In academia, it's very popular.
So, it was just the decision to go with F#. F# had actually existed for a while, also previous to it becoming part of Visual Studio,
because it
right?
did seem like it came out of nowhere, but it really was running under the.
So it came out of Don Syme, Don Syme's lab in I think he's in Cambridge, in Microsoft Research in Cambridge,
right?
And he'd been working on it for a very long time, and it had existed for a long time, and it was only when people started hearing about it was when it was being productized, was the word that people were throwing around here.
Okay. So he had the long haul too. It's like, overnight fame really involves 10 years of stand up.
Cause, we actually had a lot of overnight fame with Python and Ruby that was almost unjustified, right? It was almost vaporware. Ruby was vaporware when we announced it, essentially, right? We showed some little demo with no code.
Right.
Or at least no release code, I should say. And people were going crazy about it. And then, 3 years later, we're finally getting to a
there's
release.
something to be said for not telling anyone that you're working on
yes.
something.
So, the whole, way Microsoft releases software as far as, doing it almost in a silo, right? We're definitely different than that. And we're seeing the community react, differently to that. Some people love it and some people are like, well, just when it's in VS, tell me. Don't.
Right.
So, but, we're investing in Ruby and Python. This is we're doing the kind of next round of planning for the next version of Visual Studio, which is kind of when everyone gets money around here.
Right.
And, we're definitely involved.
So you're not going anywhere.
No, we're definitely involved in those talks. And Ruby is also, planned to come along, right? We're not going to stop, investing in Ruby either. One of the nice things about Ruby and Python is they share so much infrastructure. We're a team of 7 people, both Ruby and Python.
Wow. Total.
And it's split down the middle. So we have 3 people working on Ruby, 3 people working on Python, and then one person shifting.
What about community? Are you taking patches? Are you taking
so not to Python, but yes to Ruby.
So IronRuby is an open source project at Microsoft that takes code from the community.
Yes.
You hear that, people? It's a start.
And IronPython has been forked more than once in the past, though those forks are no longer maintained. But people had forked IronPython, calling it FePy. F-E-Py, right?
Whatever.
As the mono compatible version of IronPython. But now we actually Ruby and Python both run fine right out of the box on mono. So those projects aren't needed anymore. Actually one of our release criteria for IronRuby is, doing some testing on mono and making sure, we tell mono about the bugs. Not that we, we won't work around them if we think they're actually bugs in mono. But they fix their bugs so fast. It's unbelievable. Really? Like days.
Yeah.
Days. It's crazy.
What are the sites that people can go to learn about the DLR in general and, the DLR in .NET 4? And then where can they go to get IronPython and IronRuby? Give me those URLs again.
So dlr.codeplex.com has everything about the DLR. It has a bunch of documentation about if you were someone wanting to use it, how would you use it? If you're a language implementer, if you're a library designer and you want to use the DLR support to expose a more dynamic API, right, using the dynamic keyword in C# and whatnot. So all that stuff is on dlr.codeplex.com, including links to more MSDN-like documentation, or the documentation that is on MSDN.
Hence MSDN-like.
Exactly. Ruby and Python, IronRuby.codeplex.com and IronPython.codeplex.com both have the latest releases for both those languages. Also links to documentation and whatnot. So that's where you go for all these things.
And then when .NET 4 ships in April, there'll be compatible releases for those?
Yes. So we are definitely committed for IronPython to have a fully supported as in one of our major versions, right, as much as IronPython is supported, version of .NET 4. Cool. For IronRuby, we're also aiming for that. We might have, it might be a CTP again until we, can test things out because we're trying to ship the first version.
It's possible. There's a chance that it might happen.
Yeah, but we're trying to ship 1.0 right now. And adding .NET 4.0 to our test matrix is ridiculous.
IronRuby is primarily 3.5 right now?
It's actually, so they all, run on 2OSP1.
Really?
We don't have any specific code for 3.5. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So when you run under 3.5, it even reports the version number as 2OSP1 because that's what we're linking against. But .NET 4.0 version will be you have to use .NET 4
right,
for that one.
It would be a big deal.
Yep.
Thanks a lot for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and I'll see you again next week.